I'd also like to thank our panel for joining us today and to our audience for tuning in to Learnings from Learning Online, what to take forward into 2022. I'm delighted to be joined by a panel of experts who represent stakeholders from across the higher education space. So please allow me to introduce Dr. Seth Racy, Senior Lecturer in Biomedical Sciences at Northumbria University. Dr. Sarah Jane Bolton, Global Curriculum Lead at Labster, and Lauren Ollie, Biomedical Science student at Northumbria University. The COVID-19 pandemic forced higher education institutions, service providers, and students alike to adapt quickly to a new learning landscape. As campuses now reopen, all stakeholders must consider the impact of the last 18 months and how this will shape learning in 2022 and beyond. So I'd like to begin today's discussion by asking what universities, service providers, and students have learned from the shift to online and hybrid learning. I think we can start off today with Seth.
So I think one of the key things that they've learned is the importance of having a good blended learning experience. Many courses have not really caught up with the sort of offering a really quality online experience as well as a face-to-face, and sometimes they fall in one or other camp. So I think now there's been a real focus, certainly within the sector, that we all need to offer a good blended learning experience where there is really quality online material that students can study and engage with at home, and then also that face-to-face is really, really important. And we know that from the COVID pandemic. It's one of the things that was really missing at times, was that face-to-face. So I think, a lot of universities are playing catch up on the online experience and really trying to explore how to offer a much better quality experience in online. That the face-to-face in some ways takes care of itself. We're very used to that. We've been doing that for decades. And it's the online content that now we're really trying to focus on developing, getting really good quality online resources that are engaging to students. It's very easy to take a Blackboard site or a Sakai site and just dump things on it and go, oh, well, it's all there for the students. And that's not really much use, just to, have literally hundreds of PDFs and PowerPoints there. That doesn't really help the students. So thinking of novel ways of getting the students engaged, whether that's with, I've used the Labster simulations to simulate lab experiences. There's things like the Journal of Visualized Experiments, which is a new video journal, which is the same as your standard scientific journals, but then has video content, and just upping that sort of interaction. And really, students know when they're getting quality product and they know when they're not. So you've really got to go out and source those quality products.
Thank you, Seth. Lauren, I think it would be really interesting to come to you now and hear if the experiences Seth has just spoken about are consistent with your own. He mentioned hundreds of PDFs not being the most engaging way to learn. And was there any point when that's what you were interacting with? And have you found those kind of perhaps lab simulations a better experience?
Absolutely. So we have had a few lectures where it was just really sort of like PowerPoints, and we were just sort of like going through it, and that they were quite hard to sort of engage with and keep yourself interested in it, because obviously when you're in like the lecture halls and things, you are focused on what's going on because there's nothing else to do. But when you're at home, you're really distracted. So I found that just text heavy PowerPoints were just not, they weren't really for me. I found the Labster simulations were just, they were so engaging because it was like you were almost like playing a game, but they were asking you questions and you were doing a quiz all the way through it, and you did pick up and learn things. But I found like simple things such as the pipetting technique, like it down to the detail of like the sounds of the clicking of the boxes and putting the pipettes on. They were really helpful. They actually helped us in my exam because I could like picture them, like the click. I could hear the clicks when I was doing it, so that I found that really engaging. We were quite lucky because quite a few of our lecturers had quizzes, and we used, I think it was, is it Kazoots or Kazoo or something like that, and we've had Zetons, I think, where all the way through our sort of lectures they were like putting quizzes up and getting us to interact. And when they were getting us to interact, I felt like we learnt more because we listened more, and it like sort of broke the lectures down from maybe being like a 2-3 hour lecture, and like they broke them down in more smaller bite-sized pieces. I found that really helpful, and I found a lot more people engaged. One thing I do like about being online though is I found that more people were asking questions to the lecturers and then getting a response. And sometimes like when you're in face to face, it's great, but like if there's a big queue for people wanting to be there, sometimes you don't have the time to wait, or there's like another like sort of class coming in behind you, so you can't really engage, and you sometimes miss the questions and you have to email. And for me, sometimes I would just sort of forget what I was wanting to do. But like when you're online, you just type it away straight away, and it's there, it's in the chat box, and the lecturers get back to you with it through the session or at the end of the session. So I found like a lot of people engaged in that a bit better.
Great, that's really interesting to hear. I think especially that kind of gamification aspect of learning is something that's becoming increasingly popular. Sarah Jane, from Labster's point of view, what have you learned about learning in the last year and a half?
It's been so valuable for us to really engage with educators at universities and the students themselves to really understand what it is that they need to bolster and scaffold the learning that's ongoing within universities, but also to fill the knowledge gaps that are emerging as a result of students missing big chunks of their education during A-levels, for example, and also missing the opportunity to get exam practice of what those questions look like and what they can expect or how they have to think about science. Especially from Lauren, it's so heartening to hear that the multisensory experience that a simulation can offer, down to the sounds and down to the choices, the way that you choose to progress through the lab, or the way that you can fail on the quiet on your own without anybody else having to know, can be a really powerful learning tool that can build confidence and reduce anxiety once the students do return back to the lab, back to wet lab teaching experiences. They've already got a leg up because they've engaged with the procedural aspect of a practical scenario. And it's just one less thing to think about when you're having to put your lab coat on for the first time, having to experience the smells of a chemistry lab or a biochem lab, and also work with a lab partner when you haven't been in contact with people for so long. So I see real value in the way that we've kind of shifted the way that we think about designing simulations, and switching that to really respond to where the gaps are, or where we're hearing that the gaps are from educators, and where we hear that students want to have their learning experiences better scaffolded. And yeah, so these past 18 months have been a real listening exercise for us, and I'm super excited for the new titles that we're going to be releasing in the coming quarters, and indeed at the end of this quarter too. It's been a real roller coaster on the development side. Yes.
I can imagine. Thank you, Sarah Jane. So I'd like to think a little bit about how the lessons and the learnings that we've just discussed have shaped the learning preferences of students moving forward. So Lauren, having been forced into a radically different mode of learning and now beginning to have the option to perhaps pick and choose different aspects of online and in person, do you think that the way you and your peers want to learn has changed?
Personally for me, I'm enjoying the blended learning. I'm looking forward to going back, just for things like getting distracted and dissociating when you sort of sat in your own room or in your house. You can get easily distracted by things, and that's been hard to focus when it was just fully on that. So I'm looking forward to going back in. I'm actually really looking forward to blended learning. I think it's I get like a bit anxiety around like my travel because I have to get on the train and I don't really like it. So the fact that I don't have to get on a train 4 days a week, and I'm only maybe going to be going in twice a week, I feel really comfortable, and I'm really looking forward to being in, and the things that we're going in for are quite exciting. So yeah, I'm really looking forward to it, and I can do the other things at home there. And I love Northumbria is absolutely brilliant because they record pretty much everything, and so we've actually been able to like go back online and view our lectures and things from when we first started. So sort of, it wasn't trying to get used to a new system or anything like that, because those things were already in place before COVID. So I found that transition quite easy.
And I'm interested to know if you've got any friends or people in different courses or anyone that you speak to who you feel like has a radically different preference to you in terms of that.
I think some people are missing the socialization of it and wanting to be back and like socializing with them and wanting that whole university experience of being able to go out and you know, and get in their groups and things like that. Yeah, I think there's quite a few people want that face-to-face back because they just feel like they're missing the university experience, and it has been took away from them because they sort of haven't really been able to enjoy it. People in my course, they had 6 months where they had it. I know people last year, they've just sort of been sat at home and haven't really had that university experience. So I think they'll be really wanting to get back in and do more face-to-face.
Yeah. So Seth, with a cohort of students who perhaps feel more empowered to make decisions about the way that they learn themselves, how do you think as a lecturer and you know, a kind of decision maker in higher education, how do you meet such a broad range of demands from your students now in terms of the way they want to learn?
So I think it's about having a flexibility in the way that you construct the course. You know, if you're just calling them into lab after lab and lecture after lecture, a lot of students disengage with that because it doesn't fit their life. They've got complex lives. They're often working. They've often got other duties, whether that's childcare duties or looking after their parents. So I think it's engaging with that and making sure that if you're bringing them onto campus, you're bringing them onto campus for a real reason other than we couldn't think of anything better to do or a better way to deliver that content. And then when they're online, it is about getting that quality experience. Lauren alluded to it, that you need a plethora of different experiences, a really good visual experience, having to do something with your hands. Okay, it's holding a mouse and interacting with a simulation, but that, you know, it is a really good quality experience. And what I've found is that a lot of students are now expecting to have that online content continue after you know, lockdowns. They've seen the value of it. I've had a lot of comments from students that they enjoy doing simulations prior to a lab because they see the lab as a sort of high stakes environment where, you know, if they get it wrong, they've messed up their whole experiment. So yeah, I think carrying on with that, where you know, they can make mistakes as many times as they like. We've alluded to this before with simulations. It doesn't matter. You just go back and reset the simulations to start again. So yeah, I think that's what I would take forward. That you've got to have a flexible curriculum which blends. When you're on campus, it's for a real good reason, and then when you're delivering online, you know, get the best quality that you can, because then the students really do appreciate that, and it shows through in their comments.
Yeah, but I think what you said about the lab is kind of using a virtual experience to then go into the real world one actually perfectly exemplifies why hybrid can be so much more valuable than being entirely in person. But another point that you mentioned that I think is really important in this conversation is the kind of access. You know, you mentioned people having care responsibilities and work and all of the, you know, different life factors that people are dealing with while they're also in higher education. So I wonder, Sarah Jane, if you think that provisions like Labster or just, you know, online learning in general can actually improve accessibility?
If we're going to look for a major positive that's come out of the pandemic for higher education, for me, it's the way that there has been such huge innovation that addresses student equity in learning. Not only in the way that we offer teaching as an institution, offering education from courses or degree programs, but also in the way that teaching resources or educational scaffolding tools like Labster has really had to think about how do we ensure that every student can take something away from this experience and feel like they've gained knowledge as a result of interacting. So for us, we've been doing a lot of work at Labster to improve our accessibility tools. We actually have, we're in the process of making every single simulation in our catalogue accessible using screen reader and screen iteration to help students that traditionally probably wouldn't get a commensurate experience from a lab-based wet lab in-person type teaching experience than their peers would. So that's been like a major new thing for us in the past 2 years, especially during coronavirus, where we've been able to help educators create student equity and create student access by giving these experiences that don't necessarily get given in any other way. Also, just the ability to address what it means to do formative and summative assessment in a hybrid scenario and create access for different modes of assessing what it is a student's taken away from their degree program. Gone are the days, hopefully, maybe, of endpoint exams that are high stakes, high value, where if you do not feel, or if you're not a person who does well in the examined scenario where you have to sit 3 hours and do your exam paper, there are so many tools and so many different ways for an educator to assess those learning objectives that they've designed their course around and validate, does this student actually, have they met the intended learning outcomes? Things like Labster, things like, there are just so many different tools that can be put in the course to really understand how that student is performing within the course. And it doesn't always have to be something that excludes a whole demographic of people from doing their best in that assessment scenario.
Yeah, I think when we're speaking about access and technology, it's quite important to think about digital inequality as well. So Sarah Jane, if we could come back to you on that, how do you think that the university's service providers can actually help students who are maybe in less of a position to have the perfect learn from home setup?
Fair dues. Technology is expensive. It can be expensive. However, we've seen some absolutely fantastic different ways that universities can support students in accessing digital tools, for example, by loan schemes and hire schemes, or even just giving out things like Chromebooks, laptops that are low spec so that students can access them. As well, if a student is, for example, unable to attend due to illness or isn't able to come into the campus one day, being able to get a laptop or have a laptop that's been given to them at the beginning of the course and engage with some online learning so they don't completely fall behind, so those gaps are filled, to me is really, really, really positive. And you don't have to have the best laptop or the best computer in the world to interact with digital tools. It just needs to meet that minimum spec. So I'm hopeful that as technology continues to become easier to access on a financial level, that we'll see universities respond a little bit in supporting students that need it.
Thank you. I think also, Seth, it would be great to hear from you in terms of how Northumbria is dealing with potential digital inequality.
So very much along the lines that Sarah Jane's just outlined, we have a laptop loan scheme where students can apply to get a laptop. Now, obviously, we can't offer every student a laptop, so that's sort of, I'm not quite sure how it works, but it's pretty much a means tested way of delivering. We've also had the digital parts of our campus have remained open, the open access labs with spacing, so as to make sure that students who are in Newcastle and don't have a good connection can come in and access those resources. But there's also been a big drive to try and make sure that the resources are well constructed and work well. We use Blackboard, so it has a traffic lighting system about whether your resource actually is readable, whether it's too big, that sort of thing. But yeah, I mean, there is no way around. There are some students that are, I guess you would say, in digital poverty, where that they are working on, machines that are not up to the spec required. And we don't demand a high spec PC. You know, I'm working on a budget laptop right now. So we don't need a really high spec, but I guess there is an expectation that students will have a relatively modern computer. And when we run into problems is when students are maybe working on an 8-year-old Apple Mac, and there's not a great back compatibility there. So there are some real challenges there about whether students can access the course, whether they've got a stable internet connection. You know, there are a lot of complaints about, either the lecturer's internet connection dropping out or the student's internet connection dropping out. And it just leads to huge frustration. So, I mean, I guess that's a nationwide problem with, digital infrastructure. But yeah, hopefully that's going to be a real focus from government and universities alike.
Thank you. Lauren, we've actually got a question here from the audience for you, which is, what would you have liked to have seen your university do differently?
Probably, well, yeah, there is one thing. So I would like consistency with what sort of system we're using. So we had most of it is done on Blackboard, very easy to follow. Our exams and stuff were very similar. There was like no anxiety around that. But we had one module that ran on, I think it was Panopto, rather than Blackboard, and the exams were in a different place. Like everyone else, all the other modules exams it was very easy. You could literally just click on assessment. There was your assessment. You pressed on that, your exam for this, that, and the other, and it was just really easy. I found the one that wasn't the same, the anxiety when we were trying to find it, and like you were struggling, you were like searching all the way through, and that's really stressful, especially before an exam. You're just sort of like, like it did knock my end in a bit. I didn't like that at all. It sort of sets you up for like you sort of like, you're already like this and high as a kite. That I would like more consistency with what that, well, for exams. I would like exams to be exactly on the same sort of I don't know, yeah, the same thing.
Yeah, absolutely. No, that makes very good sense. I think another question I'd like to put to you, Lauren, is, so you walk onto the campus at the start of your next term, and what would you like to see from the physical campus, like the buildings and the infrastructure that's actually there in front of you?
Would I say anything different, or
yeah, I mean, perhaps I think we've spoken to some universities who are really rethinking their library space, for example. So rather than having these huge physical catalogues of text, maybe the library has got fewer books, but actually much more study space because everything's digital now. Is there anything that you actually feel like that about?
Probably a few more computers in the library wouldn't go amiss, because that always gets really busy. Maybe that would probably be about the only thing I actually really enjoy. I really enjoy Northumbria. I think that most of the time you can get a computer if you go into the library. So I do enjoy the books, so I do like a physical book. So I think it would be a shame to maybe lose some of those.
Yeah, I'm sure you're not alone on that. A lot of people like to, smell the pages and have it in their hands. Yeah. So do you have another, I'm thinking of a wish list that you could perhaps even put to Seth and Sarah Jane here, and we can see what they can do for you? Yeah,
so I would say, I think mental health over the last especially the last 18 months I think it's been highlighted. We need to do more about that. I've accessed our services at Northumbria and they're amazing and the staff are fantastic. It's just, there's not enough of them. There's like long waiting lists, long times, and I think there definitely needs to be more staff, but I know that's not just like Northumbria, that is literally countrywide. That's everywhere struggling for that. I would say as well, what was the other thing I was going to say actually? Oh, I think when we're using the simulations and things like that, I really like using computer games when I was younger and I've grown up with it. So I found it very easy to use and like easy to navigate. I think some people who haven't, I know one of my peers who one of my friends, he's not really great on technology. So I think that's sort of a struggle. So maybe like people who aren't that great at it, maybe like a support group or something, or a group for them to help to try and get to use it if they're not having a great the best benefit out of it, maybe something like that.
That seemed like something, Sarah Jane, that you very much agreed with.
Absolutely, yeah. I would love to see, I would love to help every student have a really positive experience with the actual interactions of a lab. So there's one aspect of like doing the tasks that are in a simulation and going through the procedure and gathering that knowledge. The other is kind of like the interaction with it. So the place where you interface with the actual simulation. And, you know, it takes a lot of iteration to get to a place where every person intuitively knows what to do. So I would love to have more students come and getting involved and maybe helping us figure out what those interactions actually are, how to be more intuitive. And I think anything we can do and learn there has a knock-on effect for making the educators or making educators feel like those simulated learning experiences are seamless and that they don't cause stress and that they don't have to address any questions from the students about them because we've done the homework ourselves to create access that is smooth, that gives value, and that students actually enjoy. I love the game aspect. And when Lauren said, you know, I've got stuff going on at home, for me, I've got 2 dogs. And they try to distract me away from everything. Whereas when I'm playtesting a simulation, I get so engrossed in it that I can ignore the fact that the dogs are running around. I can ignore the fact that something's going on in the street outside the window, rather than just reading forever and, you know, becoming bored by having to read a lot. That said, I do love a book. But the actual immersion piece of technologies like ours, I'm really glad to hear that can help folks stay focused on learning, because that's our major goal at the end of the day. So yes, more students getting involved with our testing. I would love that.
That's great to hear. I'd also just like to circle back in our last few minutes here to Lauren's point about mental health, which is certainly a massively important consideration. And Seth, obviously it comes down to investment in people and resources, but apart from that, is there anything that Northumbria is doing to kind of try and have better support structures for its students in terms of their mental health?
So it's very much focusing on making sure that the guidance tutor system works well and that there is good interaction between staff and students. I think it's mandated we contact our students at least 3 times a term, just to check up on them, see if they want a session, and encourage them to come forward. But at the same time, that they're also very much investing on the sort of one-stop shop. The library is the centre for not just learning, but also student support, and recruiting a lot of people who work in mental health. Because I'm an academic, I can signpost students, but I'm by no means an expert on mental health. So it's our job really there is to make sure that students can access the right services when they need them.
Absolutely, thank you. So I think that brings us pretty much up to the end of our session today. I would like to thank all 3 of you again for speaking with us. Lauren, it's great to hear what your experience has been over the last 18 months. And, I do hope that our audience and Seth and Sarah Jane, you can use her insight to help, pave the way for the next generation of students. But for now, I'd like to thank you all again.